when I can sit and show them on the plan all the revenue pods, and then, get them to understand each one operates differently. And when you
Correct.
operate each pod properly, it's amazing how the revenue escalates.
Welcome to Mastering Restaurant Revenue, turning restaurant dreams into significant profit. We're your host, Bruce Russo, 550 plus restaurant concepts designed and built, and a tower of national and regional awards. He's the GOAT of restaurant design and build for money-making operations. And I'm Diane Armitage, 30 years leading a global marketing agency. I help restaurants design not just a space, but a profit machine. Every episode of Mastering Restaurant Revenue delivers proven, no-fluff strategies to significantly increase profit and streamline operations, from restaurant builds and remodels to kitchen efficiencies and the hallowed guest experience, without burning yourselves out. With decades of experience and 550-plus restaurant builds, our number one goal is simple: help restaurants make more money. Because making more money shouldn't be this hard. Wouldn't you agree with that, Bruce?
I agree. Got to design them to make money.
Got to design them from the start to make money.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking about revenue pods, different revenue pods that you can put in place in your restaurant.
Yeah.
And most restaurant owners, when you come up and deal with restaurant owners on your side, how many restaurant owners percentage-wise really understand and have a knowledge of the 4 to 6 to 8 to 10 pods that they can put into a restaurant?
When I mention the word revenue pod,
Mm-hmm.
they just look at me like they've seen a ghost, because the majority of them haven't heard it. I mean,
Right.
it's something I developed, and when I can sit and show them on the plan all the revenue pods, and then get them to understand each one operates differently. And when you
Correct.
operate each pod properly, it's amazing how the revenue escalates.
Absolutely.
Because if
it's
you
never
don't,
geometric.
correct. And if you don't pay attention, if you just run it as one big restaurant, there's things on the revenue pods that get overlooked, because there's certain revenue pods that are kind of self-sustaining, and other revenue pods, you need to have your finger on the button all the time.
Yeah, that is the truth. That is the absolute truth. I always talk about, I have a marketing episode in here somewhere where I talk about the 3 ways to increase income in any business, right?
Yes.
One is to increase the number of clients. One is to increase the number of transactions. And one is to increase the number of times they return to buy.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So when we're talking revenue pods, we're solidly in the number 2, increasing the number of transactions and
Correct.
the size of the transaction. And that's what's because you're layering these revenue pods on top of each other, and you can have one guest experiencing 3, 4, 5 revenue pods in one sitting.
And didn't even realize they did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a smooth flowing process.
Correct.
So today I wanted to talk about patios. Patios in a restaurant and how that adds revenue pods to the scene. So let me ask you first, of all of the hundreds of concepts you've designed, especially concepts from the ground up, how many have had patios percentage-wise?
I would say 80% of them.
Okay. And of the
80% of
20% remaining, 80% of?
Yeah, 80% of them have patios. 20% that do not are an upscale, way upscale, that people aren't going to, they're not looking to dine on a patio eating a 2-star Michelin chef's meal.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
And it's at 2 ends of the spectrum. That's the high end of the spectrum. The lower end of the spectrum is if it's just pick up and to go, kind of simple, casual.
Well, I'll tell you, when we hit COVID, and I was working with all of the restaurants here in Laguna Beach, I mean, the restaurants that didn't have patios were really hurting from the very beginning. I mean, once we managed to get to the point where we could actually have people sitting on patios, there were restaurants in this town that didn't have patios, and they weren't the high end.
No.
And so they were really stuck. And then they had to apply for parklets that took parking spaces, in front of the restaurant. And then that took a build process, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks to get that put together. Meanwhile, the other people were doing quite well with their patios, extended patios into other people's parking lots, etc. So it's really something to think about as we move into the future and you're looking at site selection, having that space to be able to expand into a patio if you're not one of these high end or the lower end, say the window, the counter service kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I think of the Jack in the Box here in Laguna Beach.
Yeah,
it's got a huge patio.
Yes, yes,
yeah,
and it works.
But at any rate, yes,
it works.
does. It does. They do have a prime space in this town of ours. I'll tell you that.
I agree.
Okay, so talking about patios and revenue pods, when you're designing patios, how do you recommend the size of the patio versus the square footage of the restaurant, or the tables on the patio versus how many tables you have in the restaurant?
There's a formula that I use.
There always is.
I like to do 20-25% of the interior square footage for patio, because patios are special and they need to be maintained as special. So when you get too much of a good thing, it doesn't work. The worst thing you can have is a patio that's nothing but a sea of tables, because
I agree.
More. That's kind of the rule in the restaurant business, and it doesn't work that way. Now, if you're on the PCH and you have a patio facing Crystal Cove, then I'm going to tell you, I'm going to design a smaller dining room and a huge patio. Because,
well, look at what Javier's just did.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. So,
well, I mean,
yeah, you would, or if it's city lights, or if you're, beautiful lighting across the skyline at night, or then that becomes a big focal point. But on average, 25% is probably the max. If you got room for like a L-shaped patio, I particularly don't care for that, because some of the people lose the energy. So probably the best thing that I've done design-wise is where the L comes around the corner, put a small cocktail bar there, because all the energy keeps walking towards that corner, and nobody feels like they're left out.
Correct.
You gotta.
That is correct.
I mean, the design has to. I mean, that's what design's all about. We want you to go where I've designed you to go.
In a kind way.
In a kind way. But the biggest part of revenue pods, honestly, they're generated basically automatically when you build a restaurant. You just have to focus your energy on the pods and who's going to run them. But the most important part is the training of staff, especially the hostess, understanding what revenue pods are the most important of the restaurant. So the hostess is probably one of the most important people in the restaurant.
Yes, we've talked about this.
That's the first thing they see. And it plays a big role in your success of your revenue pods.
Absolutely. And, I find that when I'm working in operations for front of house, a lot of times I will designate an assistant manager or a lead server to be in charge of the patio, to make sure that the patio continues to run properly. Because in many cases, and especially on busy nights, you'll have your manager, your GM inside the restaurant running around doing all of that stuff. And there's this assumption that because people are on the patio, they're going to want to stay and hang out and enjoy the view and do all of that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that their service needs to falter.
Suffer.
And in many cases, it does. Yes. It tends to be sort of like this second thought. And unless a patio is built like a rooftop where it becomes the primary thing that everybody is serving. So it's important to ensure that you've got you've got the right servers out there with not too many tables, and you've got another person in charge overseeing all of this so that they continue to operate and take care of all those people out there.
Yeah. And
but going back to the build, but go ahead.
Well, the levels of patio, a patio with tables and umbrellas is one patio. A table with a retractable awning is another patio. A patio that has a fixed roof built into the building, that's a whole different patio. That's really a dining room that's outside.
Correct.
So to speak.
So what do you recommend for places like Houston when it gets so hot in the summer? The humidity and the heat.
For Houston, I would, with the weather there, I would design the patio connected to the building. And then I use mini split cassette units that fit in the ceiling. And, just up the tonnage. And then the retractable windows that I use, there's all kind of retractable things out there. There's roll-up shades, all kind of things. But there's windows that I've used that fold onto themselves and they stack on the top of the window.
Right, I've seen that.
It's one of the most clever things that's ever come to the business. And it's clean, they're stacked out of the way, and they're there forever.
And you had mentioned the cassettes. For some people who don't understand what you're talking about as far as heat and air conditioning goes, can you go into the details of the cassette?
Cassette unit is a mini split system. It's typically a heat pump, so it has heat and air conditioning in it. And what it looks like a larger grill that you would see in a commercial ceiling of this square with the louvers on it. Okay, but inside that you see in the ceiling, there's about a 14-inch box, and the entire air conditioning unit is in there. And it has the center is the return air of the unit, and the sides have the vents that blow the air out.
Correct.
And they're pretty economical. I mean, the capital cost per ton is a little more than a regular unit, but I typically don't like to use a regular unit on patios because you have more. The dining room has to be controlled differently from the patio, and it's been my experience that these split system cassettes, they're the best you can possibly do because you have total control of the patio.
And how does that compare to, like in Vegas, they use those spritzers in the heat, the hot, dry heat. They tend to use a lot of spritzers, which people think are kind of endearing, but you don't recognize that as a patron that 80% of that evaporates before it even gets near you in the first place. So when do you use spritzers versus the cassettes?
I've never done a restaurant with spray.
Or do you?
Never.
Okay.
I've never done a restaurant with a spray system. It's always controlled either by cassette units. If it's outside patio, I leave it totally up to the owner if they want to put, it's something that we discuss as we're designing it, and we'll have MEP put the water source out there for the system and the electrical for the system that they can connect to. But I personally don't like it. A lot of women don't like it. Frizes their hair, ruins their makeup. And, in the restaurant business, if the right-hand seat, whoever's sitting in the right-hand seat of the car, typically the woman, if she's not happy, you're not going back.
That's true.
It's a golden rule.
So tell me how, if you don't have the cassettes in the ceiling, which of course deliver heat as well, what do you do about heaters? And, you see all these different heaters that are in place and they're rolling them around and they're doing things with heaters. Some of them are up on, attached. So what do you prefer to use?
I prefer to use a cassette unit.
Yeah.
There's nothing propane, there's nothing, but again, if it's a retractable roof and you don't have nothing to install the cassette unit, then there are units out there that'll do the heat, but you're kind of limited to what air conditioning is. It really depends on the climate. I don't think we've ever done a restaurant. I don't think we've ever done a restaurant like in Houston with gas heat, like radiant heat, like you would see on the West Coast.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why?
Well, it doesn't get that cold. And on the West Coast, the evenings can be 60 degrees with breeze with a wind chill to make it feel like it's 50, which that can get very uncomfortable if you're dining on a patio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were, I was at dinner with friends recently, and we have a great hotel in the canyon, just across from the ocean. And they have a beautiful restaurant and a beautiful patio, not a big patio, small patio. But the people who were with us had a service dog. And so you eat on the patio. And boy, was it cold. It was really cold. And I was ready for it. I was dressed for it, but it still was a cold experience out there. And because they didn't have any of they had like the, kind of the heaters that they move up to you and try to keep you warm. And then top of your head is on fire, that kind of thing. But it really does take careful planning if you want it to be something that you're using in the evenings as well, or in the heat of the day. So, and important, because you're losing all of that revenue at, the colder times. I mean, you have shoulder seasons, and you have these seasons where it can be blistering hot and terribly cold, and you just can't use the patio. But you can create more revenue with these shoulder seasons by installing this kind of a system. So it does significantly more for your revenue.
There's one restaurant that I did that has an uncovered patio. And I put the air conditioning and heat, the regular RTU, on the roof. And then I ran ductwork inside some columns that I designed. And then I put ductwork in the patio before we poured the concrete. And then I designed a connection plate on the bottom of the table, and the center leg of the table was actually the ductwork, and the outer edge of the table had little slots in it for the heat or air to come out.
Well, that's thinking ahead.
I mean, no, and it worked. It was a great thing to have.
That's awesome. So it's almost like sitting on your car seat.
Correct.
With is it more like the air coming up into your car seat?
And I designed the air so it would blow lightly on your face, because if air's blowing on your face, the rest of your body's okay typically.
And it keeps the bugs away.
Yes, absolutely. It was a pretty neat neat setup. I just never expanded on the idea.
Why not?
Well, it's a lot of brain damage. I got the patent on it, so that's all that matters.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool. Okay, so we were also talking about what to do about the birds, what to do about, because I was saying that, here, when our resorts deal with, we have these beautiful oceanfront resorts, and they have beautiful patios that face the oceanfront resort. But, actually, this reminds me of a story. Chef Craig Strong.
Yes.
And he was our Michelin chef, and he came in and created the fabulous studio at the Montage Resort. And he built that up to a 5-diamond, which was the only 5-diamond between San Diego and, I think, way up towards San Francisco. Yeah. And it was a beautiful high-level restaurant. So he was doing a kind of like a food review with me, because he had a new spring menu, had a new bar menu. That's what it was. It was a bar menu. So he had brought out all these food items, and they're beautiful. You know how he does all of his beautiful plating and everything, and he had these big planks that were like these super thin, amazing planks made out of rye or something that he had slaved over in the kitchen. And he brought them out to me. And as he and I were sitting at the table out at the patio, this giant seagull just came in, took the whole plank.
Wow.
Took off with it. And, you end up with these kinds of stories. I mean, I've seen seagulls take, bolt down boiled eggs, at a buffet on the patio. I mean, people will bring their plate out, and then they'll go get their coffee, and they come back and it's gone. So what do you do about birds on the patio?
That's a tough call. I mean, the simplest solution is to hire hawks and falcons to keep them away.
And this is what they do at the resort. Yeah. They finally hired these falconers who come in and just walk around with the hawks. I mean, they hardly even fly.
No, all they have to do is see them.
They just walk around.
No, trust me. Right. That's all they have to do is see them. Yes.
They're like the mafia.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have to do anything. They just have to sit there.
They just have to, exactly. Just show up.
Yeah. And it is incredibly effective. Incredibly effective. It's very interesting. So, but at any rate, okay, getting back to the patio design. Now, I've seen seas of tables, right, that have no design whatsoever. They're just like patio tables with crappy chairs, and people put them out there, expect people to sit there. Some of them are those iron rung, the weave kind of things that are so miserable and hot. So what do you do about patio furniture?
Well,
I know it depends on the style of the restaurant.
When I design a patio, I like to have greenery, foliage, that, maybe a pot or a planter with not real tall green, but just green to kind of, if it's a big patio, to break it up like in three pieces. And, that's what we were talking about earlier. It's just a patio. Just go ahead and buy them $59 chairs. It's just a patio. Well, that's probably the worst thing you can do, because you have to have fabrics are colored. You have to have comfortable furniture. And you have to have sturdy chairs. It's the cost of doing business. That's your patio business.
And it is a significant revenue pod.
Yes.
I mean, I'll tell you, I know the difference as, being in the right-hand seat of the car, going into a patio that has had some thought put into the furniture, the furnishings, and you just feel like you're in a magnificent experience.
Correct.
That's what you want to have.
Banquets are, I do a lot of banquets and patios because a lot of time it's groups of people. And it's nice to have a banquet along one entire wall, or, split it up to where you can get 8 tops or 10 tops. When it comes to restaurants, that's kind of a clutch receiver for you to have those banquets out in the patio, because typically when you start getting more people at a table, the louder they get.
This is true.
So you put them in revenue pod 4, which is the patio, and they can make all the noise they want. Again,
now
it's up to the hostess to make the right decision.
Right. It's very true. Now, when you had designed a restaurant here in Laguna Beach, because of historical limitations, you had to keep the front door where the front door was, and it wasn't even a big front door. You couldn't make it a bigger front door.
Correct.
And you had really wanted to create a front door experience through the patio, because the patio was this beautiful on the side of the restaurant, so to speak.
With the waterfall and the hand-painted tile, and
it was stunning.
Yes.
So what do you think about putting a patio on the front as part of the entrance into the restaurant versus, would you make it a priority design, or would you say, okay, well, this is what we can make it work? You would.
It's either can be on the front or to the left or right of the front door. But typically, if I put it to the left or right, when you're walking towards the front door, you can see that energy on the patio. Okay, again, so when you get the hostess, you have that. The hostess needs to know that she needs to seat the people closest to the front door, so there's energy. You can have 20 people on the patio, but at the other end, you're not going to see them. You see what I'm saying?
Correct.
So it's kind of like the restaurant design comes with an instruction manual, and
yes,
it
really does.
Yeah, it comes with an instruction manual.
We're writing that right now.
Yes, and. I did this because when the people come in, they do this typically. And, it all works like a big machine, and even as the manufacturing plant thing, that's what comes in the back door. This is what needs to happen. Here's the instruction book on what I designed. You got one way into the kitchen for all the dishes to go there, and you got one way out where all the food comes. Pretty straightforward.
Correct. And let's talk about access to the patios or the rooftops for the servers, because I've been in many situations where the servers are going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down the stairs. And I think that is a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Yes.
And like in our rooftops that we have, the servers have to come out from the kitchen, around through the restaurant, up to the stairs, or they have expediters who are coming from the kitchen behind up the stairs, which is helpful. But if the patio is packed, they have to use both accesses to move around, or that's what the decision was. But when you look at that kind of a traffic pattern and the efficiencies, you've lost it all. You've lost it all with that. And you're also looking at how much time it takes to get the food to the rooftop or to the patio. And this is where you begin to design a different menu for the patio experience.
Correct. Either design a different menu for the patio on the second floor, or you put just a small warming kitchen up there with a walk-in cooler to where here's the menu. We only got 6 things on the menu, and you prep those, all those downstairs in the kitchen, prep kitchen, and put them upstairs before service in a walk-in cooler. So it's basically a finishing
Well, that's pretty smart. That's correct. So when you develop a finishing kitchen on a rooftop or a patio, what all goes into that finishing kitchen, equipment-wise?
Typically an Alto sham. And an Alto sham is a piece of equipment that maintains the correct temperature for whatever you're putting in. I'll give you an example. You could put 10 prime ribs, full prime ribs in Alto sham before you leave at night, and press the button and put the probe in and come back the next day. If you put them in there for it to be medium rare, they're done at medium rare. And it holds it at medium rare the entire day. I'd do that.
Right, so they don't continue to cook.
Correct. I would do
it's an amazing
small
machine.
convection oven and a little 4-top burner. If there's any saute or anything that needs to happen, a little bit of refrigeration and a small walk-in cooler, not for storage, but someplace to park the racks that have been prepped. So they go in and out the walk-in. But the way it's set up is you take a sheet of prep and you put it in the refrigeration at your cook station. So it's you don't need a lot of equipment, and it doesn't need 10 feet, maybe a 10 by 10 square. And it's
and
okay
it's
for that.
interesting because
Go ahead.
It's interesting because even the restaurants that I know of that really rely on their patio business and have extensive patios for a 10 by 10 kind of square, I don't think that's even crossed their minds.
Probably not.
And the amount of time it saves and the efficiency of the service and the expediting is huge. I mean, once you have an idea of what the people are ordering, it doesn't take long. When you've got 6 items or 8 items on the menu, you're able to prep, at least 75% of it based on the day that you've got, the hours that you've got the patio open.
Correct.
And you're ready to rock and roll.
Well, but even goes one step further. So, when they make the reservation on Resi or Open Table or whatever, they just add that line item to where you can click on it. Patio seating, yes or no. And under that, you just put a caption. The patio menu is limited to the main dining menu. And when they click main dining, they're staying downstairs. So, there's a lot of things that are in place that I'm not sure they're used to their maximum benefit. You got to educate them before they get there.
That's right. You can get a lot of information from your patron before they walk in the door.
Correct.
And that's what's so important to understand. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, give me some other ideas of different patios that you've designed. What are some of your favorites?
I did a patio that had different levels, had 3 different levels, which the landscape of the lot and just the way it all worked in the landscaping. It was I think there was about 12 inches of drop in between the 3 levels. And
wow.
But I kept the ceiling the same. So at the lower level, the ceiling was much higher. And as you went up the steps, that side of the patio was a lot more cozy. It was really cozy because the ceiling was at 8 foot and, there was a lot of green foliage back in that corner. So, it was beautiful. And I think
it was more of it was more of a tiered patio.
Correct. Yep. So each level stepped down like
amazing.
12 inches. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. What city was that in?
It was here in Dallas. It was here in Dallas.
That's interesting. Okay. And then anything else that you'd like to add about, the expediting of food or anything that actually helps restaurants create a significant revenue pod out of these patios? We've covered a lot.
if you, one of the things, and it's really up to the operator, but a small cocktail bar is always nice to have on a patio. But it depends on the concept. If you're $100 check average, then I would suggest putting a small cocktail bar. When I say cocktail bar, it's maybe 6 to 8 foot long. It's not made for anybody to sit at. And you have to get a rock star bartender that can throw the bottles and spin the cups and the whole 9 yards, and he's the entertainment. And, it's just another reason for people to come back, because when they go home, man, you ought to see this bartender. We just had dinner at blah, blah, blah. This bartender is something else. The tricks he does. And so whatever it takes to get them back.
Right. It's really more of a service bar.
Correct.
Because you don't have people sitting at the bar, like you said. But they are. Now, we had talked about a restaurant that we're looking at working on in Florida, and they don't have an outside bar. Now, when you are looking at extending a patio for a restaurant like that, which has an amazing view, are you going to put in that kind of a service bar, a small cocktail bar, or would you actually put out something that would be larger?
Actually, I'm going to put 2 out there, because that patio that I sketched, it's like 160 feet long. It's huge.
Well, and if you do have groups come in and they take half of the side of the patio over here, they're handled. They're all managed with that particular service bar over here, and the public can still be coming into this side of the patio and getting plenty of fast service there. So makes perfect sense.
I'm a big fan of service bars in concepts with a $100 and up check average. And it's amazing how many owners push back on me and end up deleting it.
But just think about, if you have a patio that size, think of the amount of labor required of the bartenders inside the restaurant who have to be making all of those drinks for the patio. And then, of course, people running the drinks.
Correct. But let me point something out. If you got a restaurant that's got 260 seats in it, and you go to the bar and they got a 4-foot perforated spot that's a service bar. So that means, you could pretty much say 80% of the people out of 260 are going to have a cocktail, some kind of drink coming from the bar. And then you got a bar that seats 40. You see what I'm saying? And the servers have to go get it at the service bar. Makes absolutely no sense.
Correct.
If you put a service bar in the back that works with the wait station, where they have the coffee, the tea, the water, the glasses, everything right there. So on their way to exit, they can pick up the cocktail. It's very simple.
Correct.
Because when they come in, the POS is right there, and they put the drinks in the POS. They go back out, whatever they're going to put water on the table. When they come back around, the drinks are ready, especially when it's just bottle service. Why do you want to have the waitstaff standing watching a bartender open a bottle of wine or a champagne?
True.
Right? He
and
could
why
have
does the
made 4
bartender
cocktails.
who's actually serving up, he's got to be making cocktails.
But the big pushback is, we got to pay for that labor. Well, it's not like you're paying them $100 an hour. Let's say it's an 8-hour shift. Let's say it's a 6-hour shift, and you're paying the guy $30 an hour. I would gladly pay $180 in labor to have my most profitable items on the menu in the restaurant. I would pay that $180 to watch him stand around, just for him to execute the highest profit product in my menu.
Exactly. And how many cocktails do you have to sell to cover that labor cost? Not many.
His day is paid for after he's been there an hour.
An hour at most.
At most.
Really. Yeah. Very well said.
Then you don't...
Just more streamlining.
Then it eliminates the boys running ice to the bar. They got to walk through the dining room, unless they have ice makers put in them. But a lot of bars, they would prefer to have just refrigerated storage in lieu of an ice maker, because they just have somebody... Well, you get into upper check average, that's a little tacky for me.
Yeah.
to to have somebody walk through the dining room with 2 big plastic buckets of ice. Tacky.
Correct. No, I agree. And, I mean, if they're not rolling the buckets of ice and they're carrying the buckets of ice, that's hard on the labor who's carrying the buckets of ice.
Exactly.
And so you have to start planning your bar, whether it's your service bar, your patio bar, wherever you've got these bars, to work with the labor that's required to bring in the kegs,
Absolutely.
to bring in the ice, to do all of that kind of thing.
They need a clear path from the dining room on how they get the food, and then a clear path from the patio back to the back of the house to get to the dishwasher. That path has to be created. They don't need to be zigzagging through tables to get from A to Z. I mean, it's, people come to dine.
Absolutely.
They come to dine. They want to see the food and the cocktails. It's 2 items on the list. That's what they're coming for. They're not coming for the extracurricular activity to watch the servers go in and out and the door open in and out and the ice maker don't, what I'm saying? They're not coming for that. I know it's all part
Nobody
of the
wants
business.
to see it.
No, but the more you limit, I'd say 95% of my designs, there's no doors on the kitchen. You walk around a Z. I create a Z to where
Correct.
You will never, I don't care where you dine in any restaurant that I design, you can't see the kitchen anywhere unless it's a open kitchen concept.
Correct. And even then you've got prep in the back part of the kitchen.
Correct.
Right? And you don't want the diners in an open kitchen sitting to see what's going on in the prep in the back. And so and there's nothing more annoying than being a patron in a high-end restaurant, hearing those doors go boom, 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 boom all night long.
Yep.
Yeah.
Typically the worst seats in the house.
Yes, true.
And then, I'm sure you've seen this a lot where, it's an open kitchen design and they build the wall and then they put glass on top of the wall where the host station is. And so you can see what's going on. Then they bring the ice machine, the cappuccino machine, and the soda machine. And guess what shows through the glass? It's the back of all that equipment.
I can think of that exactly right now.
I mean, you could probably, if you thought about it for 5 minutes, you could probably name 10 places just like that.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that extraordinary?
So
they're not even thinking about the front end experience, walking in the door and having that first impression.
And I'm working one right now. It's here in Dallas. You were here when you were here. I built this beautiful radius wall for radius booths, and I think it's 5 foot to the sill of the glass, and then it's 2 foot of glass, and then top of the wall. And the wall is freestanding because the ceiling is like 14 foot. So it's a beautiful view. And the owner says, well, you really can't see anything when you're sitting. I said, well, you're not supposed to. I said, the glass is so you could see the sizzle, the flame, and the smoke. And the heads of everybody that's working, you can see from their chest, basically from the chest up, all the activity in the kitchen. I said, now when you need this soda machine, when you call Coke to install, and the Coke guy comes out and he's got this big thing. It's like 3 foot tall. I said, this isn't a 7-Eleven. It's not the Coke machine that I specified. He said, well, I don't know if we have those. I said, trust me, you have them. I've probably used them in excess of 100 times. They're a cut-in model. The ice bin is underneath the soda machine instead of on top.
Correct.
And they're 28 inches tall.
Yeah, that's great. It just takes a little bit of upfront planning and knowing that you've got that kind of equipment available to you. And there aren't a lot of restaurant builders, architects out there who even know what kind of equipment is out there. They don't have that kind of knowledge. They haven't built hundreds and hundreds of concepts and had to work the deals and negotiate the deals with all of these equipment manufacturers. But they know what they're doing on their end. They know how they're trying to provide different solutions to all of these different restaurants. Yeah. So, yeah, good to do your research or have Bruce do the research because he's already done the research.
He's already done it. Yeah.
He's already done it. Okay. So I'm going to leave with one last question. Your most favorite patio that you ever built at any restaurant? Where is it?
Let me think here. I would say from a coziness, intimate space, I would say the one I did in Laguna.
Oh, that was lovely.
I mean,
Really lovely.
it's,
Utilized.
that tile that's on the tile, I don't know if you knew this, but there was a shed before we got there. There was a shed that was over that fireplace and water fountain.
Right, you told me that. Yeah, it was just like a tool
And
shed
when we
or something.
demoed the shed, it was like, oh my God, look what we found.
Right. And it was, I mean, that tile dated back to what, 50s? Earlier than that?
Yes.
That was beautiful.
The artist that painted the tile was from Laguna. And now his daughter has taken over his practice. I forget her name, but I mean, and a lot of that tile was falling off the wall. I mean, I found this frisket paper that had a light adhesive on it. And it came in rolls, and I rolled it all over the tile, and then very gingerly took the tile off and numbered the backs. So when we were ready to put it back, it went back exactly like it was.
And then she created tile and filled in, right? Where there were broken pieces and things like that, as I recall?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. It is beautiful. After Craig Strong left that space, I never saw that waterfall work again.
Really?
And it's so beautiful.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it's simple.
So
I mean,
I'm hoping, with the new concept coming in, they know what they're doing. So I'm hoping that they really make something out of that, because that patio was beautiful. And then it just became this sort of, I don't know, it was like this side function that sometimes, and in Laguna Beach, people love being out on the patio. Even in that location where that is, you're watching all of the tourist traffic go by. You're seeing a portion of the ocean and the beach. And, and that's part of the fun, is just watching all the people go by when you're sitting there as a tourist or a resident in Laguna Beach.
And the traffic noise on that patio is minimal compared to other patios.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, it's a beautiful patio. Well, I'm glad that you liked that. I'm glad that you put that in place for us here in Laguna Beach.
I would say that was my best one. Again, the only thing that I would do differently for that restaurant is make the current entry door and exit door. And there's a pair of doors down by the patio that when they're open, you walk into the patio, a covered patio, and that should be the entrance to the restaurant.
Right. Agreed.
But
it's beautiful.
Yes. But, the way we couldn't move the front doors, so the restaurant had to design the restaurant around that front door. So that's why the bar is there.
Right.
That's the only problem I have. If you come into the double doors, walk in the patio, you got to walk through the dining room to get to the bar. I mean, how many people notice that?
You didn't have an option because you were required to...
Handcuffed.
You were required to follow, historical handcuffs, right? Which is a whole nother story we'll cover in another episode. But yes, it did require you to create around a less than ideal design. Right. And people still rave about the place. They still think it's absolutely stunning. But for you, it was a less than ideal design because of the historical handcuffs.
Well, every day it was something.
Yeah.
Even if the code, it didn't matter whether the code said it or not. It's somebody's personal opinion. Mm-hmm. I can go on and on and on about that.
And we will in an episode soon. Yeah. Because it's amazing how it interferes with the actual efficiency and revenue potential of a restaurant. When you're dealing with people who are insisting that you have it meet certain requirements that meet their requirements. But that's for another episode. We have talked about patios at length.
Yes. That restaurant I designed to be a $5 million a year restaurant, minimum. All the equipment that's in it. It's designed for a minimum of $5 million a year. It's easy to turn. It could turn 3 times very easy. You got a patio. The bar is sufficient. It's just need the right concept and the right operator.
Well,
for
let's
the
hope
right
that
time.
concept's coming in now. Yeah. Let's hope that concept's coming in now. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right, folks, we're going to leave you this episode. And now we hope you've given you all kinds of information on patios, service bars, what to do on a patio, how to furnish a patio, all that kind of thing. And we will be looking forward to helping you in our next episode, where we'll be talking more about more revenue pods for your operation. Thank you for coming to Mastering Restaurant Revenue. And we look forward to talking with you again soon. You guys make it a great week.
Thank you for joining Bruce and Diane on this journey of mastering restaurant revenue. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps them deliver even more of what you want to hear. Until next time, keep refining your approach, stay passionate about your craft, and here's to your restaurant's continued success.